For the next 30 days, I'm going to use my computers like it's 1989. Made possible in part by the good folks over at Pogo Linux. If you want amazing servers, powered by amazing operating systems like Linux, multiple distributions of Linux even. You got Red Hat, CentOS, Ubuntu, OpenSUSE, Scientific Linux. They support a whole bunch of them over there at Pogo Linux. If you just have specific server needs, you want to use open source, you want to use free software to accomplish your goals, you want to have giant servers holding petabytes of data, Pogo Linux is your guys. Go over to pogolinux.com for that. All right, let's talk about this. I like to challenge the way that I interact with my computing devices. I do this fairly regularly. I don't like to be stuck in a stagnant computing rut where I sit around and just do things the way I've been doing things. Because the reality is, computing changes fairly regularly. How we interact with computers, what computers work like. Despite the fact that many similarities have held true over time, there have been some really fundamental and radical changes to that in my lifetime alone. And over the last say 5, 6, 7 years or so, I've issued myself many challenges. And usually I'll issue myself a challenge for a week, 10 days, 30 days, usually not much longer than that, just to see what I can glean from a new experience. Things like only living in DOS for a month. I tried this out. I used free DOS in a variety of different emulators and just lived in it for close to a month anyway. And I learned a lot about what I like to do, what makes me the most productive, what brings me the most joy in my computing environment. Now, when that was all done, I didn't stay living in DOS full time, but I ended up actually incorporating free DOS, which is a GPL'd open source free software implementation of DOS, into my daily workflow. It's weird. It's not a normal thing that most people do, and I don't even recommend that other people do it, but it's something that I found oddly compelling and satisfying for me, and it actually increased my productivity. I spent more than a month at one point de-Googling my life, just completely ripping out any trace of the hooks that Google had in my life. And I kind of backpedaled a little tiny bit in that I started using things like YouTube and such again. But for the most part, I've kept Google out of my life, and my life ended up being better for it. Even though I didn't stick to 100% no Google, I'm like 0.5% Google now, and that's okay. And I found that it really was improving myself and how I use my computers because of doing that little experiment. I've also done ones where I live entirely in a Linux shell, don't use a GUI at all, just a Linux terminal. I've gone cell phone free. I actually did that one for quite a few years. And I've found every time that I got something out of it. Even if I hated the experience or I loved the experience, there was always something good and always something bad. And I kind of use that to rework how I use computers going forward. So I'm going to do a 30-day thing. This is just something I want to do for myself to satisfy my own curiosity, things I've been mulling over lately. And what I'm going to do is from now until April 16th, so I'm recording this on March 17th, so that's 30 days. March is a 31-day month, so this is there'll be a 30-day spread right there. I'm going to use my computers, and I include every gadget that is a computer in that, as if it were roughly 1989. 1989, when I was 10 years old. Now, this isn't going to be exact. I'm not going to only use 1989 hardware and software. I'm going to take all of the best of what that experience was like in 1989, or roughly thereabouts, the mid 80s through the mid 90s, that kind of broad range, what that experience was like, how we interacted with computers, and apply that to current technology. So let's take a quick look at what things were kind of like in that time span, or that roughly 1989-ish period of time. Well, to start with, you had a desk, you had a station. When you wanted to use your computer, you didn't whip out your phone from your pocket. You didn't pull out a tablet. Very rarely did you have something like a laptop. You sat down at a desk and you said, I'm going to do a thing. I'm going to play a game. I'm going to write a message to someone, compose an email. I'm going to log into a BBS and chat or game or upload or download files. I'm going to write my grand opus novel. Whatever it was, you sat down with a mission. Even if that mission was specifically to waste time, you sat down with a mission. And I got to give credit. Go check out podstazinski.com. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The link's up there on the screen. Up on his page, I got this picture from there. He has glamour shots of retro computers, Commodore 64s, Apple IIs, old Amigas, all sorts of things, old Atari systems, set up like they would have been in that time when they were popular. And they are just the most beautiful pictures in the world. If you just simply want to geek out over awesome retro pictures of computers, that's the website for you. His pictures are just marvelous. But you sat down at the station. Like, this is a picture of an Amiga. You could sit down and use your Amiga because it's Amiga time. And you sat at your station and you used it. Now, maybe it was a desk, maybe it was a table in the kitchen or the dining room. I knew lots of families that had a dining room computer, sometimes in the living room, sometimes in an office or mom and dad's bedroom. If you were really lucky back in the 80s, you'd have a computer in your own bedroom if you were a real good boy or girl. And that's how you used your computer. Now, if you were on the go, you had a couple of options, but they weren't quite like they are nowadays. For example, the Newton line, the Newton message pad and the like, really kicked off in the very early 90s. So it was a little later than kind of what I'm looking at for 89. But, typically you were offline. You were recording some notes, playing some games, typing few things out, using a calculator, whatever, etc. And then when you got back home, you synced that data either by copying files directly or hooking up your device to a null modem cable and transferring things around, or if you have a nice sync cable, etc., up to your main desktop computer. That's what portable computing was like in that era. And before the Newton, there was a bunch of things. Most interestingly to me, I've never had one of these, but the Atari Portfolio line was truly fascinating. They came out there in the end of the 80s, and they actually ran DOS. It had a roughly Intel 8088 processor in it. The resolution, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I want to say it was something like 260 by 80. That feels kind of wrong. It was something in that ballpark, though. Black and white screen and all that. So obviously you weren't going to be playing really high-end games on it, but you could have an MS-DOS based little handheld palm top styled little computer with a physical keyboard on the go. But again, you weren't connected to anything. You just would get back home and copy your files back and forth between this and your main computer, whatever it was. And it wasn't even the first of its line. Really, if you want to go back to the first handheld computers that really did some stuff, you go back to the late 1970s with the Radio Shack TRS-80 PC-1, the Pocket Computer 1. And it really wasn't all that dissimilar to the TRS-80 Model 102 that I've got back there. That's more of a laptop form factor, in that it's essentially a tiny little basic powered computer. That's really all you did with it, is you ran some BASIC on it. And there were some applications that you could type into there to do some things, but it was very, very straightforward. Type some notes, run some simple BASIC games, maybe some apps, do some calculations. It was much more powerful than a calculator, but far less powerful than what we'd consider a modern day PDA. So really, you had two aspects to your computing life. You'd sit at your desk, and then when you weren't at your desk, if you wanted something computing with you, you'd have some sort of a Palm Top type device, a Palm Pilot, though that actually was in the later 90s when the Palm Pilot hit. How crazy is that? That was the later 90s when we had Palm Pilots. That was a long time ago in technology terms, but wasn't really that long ago in terms of actual years. Grayscale, or green scale rather, single tasking Palm Pilots was the late 90s. How crazy is that? Anyway, but that's what you had with you. You weren't being alerted to messages. You weren't emailing on the go, at least not without syncing later on. But that's what it was like. You were using a computer for a very specific purpose at a very specific place for a specific reason. You weren't being alerted. You weren't being attention grabbed by something ever. It was a very different usability experience. And we had email back then. This is a screenshot of what it's like to email on the BBS that I run. And this is what emailing was like for most people back in the, say, late 80s, early 90s. That's general time frame. You'd log into some sort of an online system, whether it was a CompuServe-esque thing or Prodigy or one of the thousands and thousands of BBSs running across the land that you could dial into with a standard dial-up modem. And this is how you had email. And there were other things besides that, but that was the primary way that people digitally communicated, was old school email, which we still had. And we didn't really have social media back then either. There wasn't anything quite like a Twitter or a Facebook. You could kind of make a case to say like old message forums on BBS's message boards or Usenet news groups were kind of the predecessors to things like Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, and so many other things. But they were so fundamentally different. They weren't alerting you to things ever. They weren't trying to guess what you may or may not want to see. People didn't have a tendency to hop on them when and take a picture of their food and tweet them at you. It was you went on them when you wanted to discuss a specific topic. You'd go into a specific message group and say, I want to talk about the politics of hamsters for a while. And that's what that group is about, hamster-based politics. And that's what you'd talk about. And things would get off the rails plenty of times. And then if that happened, you just jumped over to a different Usenet news group or a different BBS or a different board on that BBS. But it was a fundamentally very different experience. You only used it when you sit down and said, I am going to have a conversation with these people right now. And it wasn't really in real time. You didn't expect to go onto a BBS message board, post a comment, and then immediately get 27 likes, a couple of reshares, and some replies. No, you'd post a message, and then maybe you'd come back the next day and check it. And see who replied and see if it was worth replying to you, or see if there was other messages you wanted to reply to. It was really more of a slow rolling conversation. People took their time a little bit more with it. It was a very different experience. And now, between then and now, we're sitting here in 2018 now, and the experience is so similar in many ways. We still have email. We still have places to go to post messages to each other. We still are using computers with keyboards to type in things on our screens. However, as many similarities as there are, there's just as many differences. And the feel of them, the pacing of things, the notifications or lack of notifications, the always connectedness or always not connectedness is so fundamentally different that it really causes me to wonder, what would it be like if I applied that level of connectedness, that I'm going to work with my computers as if I had the limitations of 1989, but using my modern machines? What would that do to my productivity? What would that do to my happiness, to my health? What would that do to my free time? What impact would that actually have? And so I'm going to try that. So what I'm going to try to do, I'm going to outline for you how I'm going to do this here, is I'm going to replicate as best I can the core 1989-ish, give or take a couple of years in either direction, depending on, what your viewpoints or personal experiences are, that experience using today's technology. So it's pretty straightforward, and it's not radical. I'm not saying I will not use any internet or new technology. I'm not going to use any software produced after 1993. I'm not saying anything like that. I'm still going to use my modern equipment right in front of me. I'm still going to use far more modern portable devices than we had possibly available to us in the late 80s or even the late 90s. I'm going to use modern equipment. or at least mostly modern equipment to pull this off. So these rules I'm about to lay out for you may seem psychotically arbitrary, because they kind of are. It's just me trying to replicate this experience through a set of arbitrary rules. And realistically, there's nothing wrong with that. It'll help me achieve my goal of kind of seeing how it would be like. Now, the first rule I'm making for myself is the simple one, and I think a pretty obvious one based on what we just talked about that late 80s-ish computing experience, and that is that I'm going to compute at workstations. Not at workstations, at stations, at a spot. Whether it's sitting at my desk right here, I'm in my studio, this is a station, I sit down, I'm performing a task, I'm doing a thing with my computer. I'm not going to just wander around my house with a tablet or a wireless laptop just meandering all over the house, which is something that I tend to do a fair bit, and I know I'm not alone in that. So computing at stations. I'm going to sit down to do a thing. That thing may be totally just to goof off for a while. That thing may be to just check email or to play a video game or to sync some data around or what have you, or to record a video. Recording, computing, doing all of it only at workstations. Pretty straightforward. Also, anything that has any sort of notifications, gone. Those, we really didn't have such a thing back in that period of time, back in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s. You didn't really walk around thinking about, I wonder if I'm going to get push notifications for my recent tweet. Anything that has notifications, gone. Just gone. I feel like this is one of the critical bits in order to help replicate that 1980s experience, where you're using a computer, you're using a computer. And when you're not using a computer, you're doing something else, not with your computer, right? It's, I'm either connected or I'm not connected. I'm online or I'm offline. There's no in between. And I do not want to always be online while I'm doing this sort of experiment. So anything that has pushy notifications, even when I'm sitting down at my desktop here, any like email things that just alert me all the time, nope, off. Arbitrary, but I'm going with it. Also, no checking of social media of any kind. And that includes Twitter, Facebook. Well, Facebook's already kind of taken care of, but Reddit, Mastodon. I'm including Reddit in this. I know many people consider Reddit more of a message forum, but really it's very social media. You basically, people put things up and then everyone else judges them. That's it's more like judging media. But I'm just going to kind of put it off to the side. All of it, all of those social media, I'm not going to check them at all. Not at all. Not, okay, only when I'm sitting down at my desk. I'm simply not going to do it, because we really didn't have things quite like that when we were using machines in the 80s. We really didn't. Again, you can make an argument to say that some of the old message forums had some similarities, or IRC type chat. You could say, well, that has some similarities, but it really doesn't. There's a fundamental difference. With Twitter, you post something, and your opinion, your thought, your snark, your I'm being super wise and smart, look at me, or your pictures of your socks, or whatever it is you're posting, may be interesting, may not be interesting, may be profound, maybe just pointless and idle chit-chat. It could be all over the map. And while that has value, and I really do believe it does have actual value, it's not what we had back then. That's not to say it's good or bad, but it's totally different experience-wise. So I'm going to cut it out completely. This presents a small challenge for me, however. I produce videos and books, and I go to conventions, and I give shows. I stand on stage and do things, and being able to communicate and tell people I'm going to be here at this date and time, come see, is very handy and useful. And so many people do that via Twitter and everywhere else that I still need to, in order to do my job, need to be posting to those places for things like announcements. Like I just posted a new show, then I'll allow myself to post that to Twitter in order to do that without seeing anything else on Twitter. Luckily, what I can do on lunduke.com, I already have like little social media sharing buttons, right? So I can just at the bottom of my post click whatever video I posted, I click share this to Twitter type of thing, and it'll just send it away, right? Easy, done, nothing fancy, nothing crazy. I don't actually have to check Twitter. I don't have to see what people responded to the show about. I don't have to see any of that stuff at all. I'm also going to avoid the YouTube comments of my shows. So if you want to get a hold of me, I've got some other ways for you to be able to do that coming up here shortly, but I'm getting rid of all of it. It's all of the social media related stuff. I'm not deleting my accounts. I'm still going to be posting announcements to them, but I'm just simply not going to check them. See, it's very arbitrary what I'm doing here. It's not like I'm going cold turkey, no social media. I'm just going to not check social media, which means I won't be seeing what other people post, which means I won't be replying to other people. I won't be retweeting other people or liking other people. None of that for 30 days, which has its goods and bads. I can see good and bad with that, but I'm still going to do that because it gets me closer to that 1989 experience. And honestly, for a lot of ways, this is probably good for me because I have a hard time keeping my opinions to myself. And people, if they post something stupid and it comes across my Twitter feed and I'm looking at it all the time, I have to reply because they're being stupid and I have an opinion. So that's not necessarily the best thing, right? So I'm just not going to be reading Twitter, and we'll see how that goes. Now, I will allow myself certain ways to interact with people, but I'm going to focus on ways that really were either around in the late 80s to early 90s or are really fundamentally similar to things that were around in the late 80s and 90s. So like, for example, I run a BBS called the House of Lunduk BBS. It's you can find it at lunduk.com. There's details on it. I'm going to let myself log into there, hang out and chat with people there, both in the chat room on the BBS and the message forums and whatnot. And the reason I'm going to allow this is because this was around in the late 80s, so I'm going to go with it. But it's also a specific thing that's not always on. I have to say specifically, I'm going to sit down right now and BBS, right? And just hop onto there and do the BBS stuff. And then when I'm done, I log out and walk away. And then I check it again the next day, maybe. So I'll allow myself to do that. So if you want to get a hold of me, that's a perfectly good avenue. Also, cell phones. This cell phone is a perfectly nice little cell phone, right? It's running Copperhead OS, fairly secure as far as Android-based cell phones go. Overall, it's a nice phone, right? I'm going to keep it with me, but basically have everything turned off. There's no applications running at this point on there that will notify me of anything. It's really for emergencies. So if I'm out and about, obviously I didn't have a cell phone in 1989. Technically it would have been possible, but I didn't have one. Most people didn't have one. But I still want to be able to, being a guy who has kids, I've got 2 kids. If I'm out and about, I want to be able to call someone in case of an emergency or someone to get a hold of me. So if my wife can get a hold of me. So I'm still keeping this, but just for that purpose. So if I'm out having lunch with someone, this does not come out. This stays in my bag and stays in there until someone needs to call me for an emergency or I have an emergency and need to call someone. No looking stuff up on some sort of online mapping service, whether I use OpenStreetMaps or Google Maps or what have you. No checking my email on it. No checking Twitter on it. No, none of that stuff. None of it. No playing games on it. Keeping it away. It's too new. It's too flashy. Just for emergencies. Now, I'm going to allow myself to do portable computing, and I'm going to allow myself to do it with much more modern devices, with a limitation. No Wi-Fi, except to use as a tool to sync data between my devices and my computers. So, for example, I've got this little pocket chip here. It's a nice little $69 machine. I don't know if they sell that anymore, but it's nice enough. This is a Nokia N810 internet tablet. It's like a decade plus old now, but it's still perfectly viable. It's not really an internet tablet. It's more of a Linux-based PDA. So I've got that, and as well as my little Noodle Pi here, which is basically this super tiny, like couple inch sized tablet PDA thing that's powered by a Raspberry Pi Zero. These are little tiny devices, but I'm just basically going to turn the Wi-Fi and all them off, and I can go out and I can use them. You know, I can use them like I would have used a Palm Pilot or a Newton Message Pad or the TRS-80 PC Portable Computer 1 or the Atari Portfolio or something like that, right? I can pull it out because I want to play for a little while. I want to goof off, or I want to take some notes, or I want to type some things up, or I want to use a calculator real quick. Whatever, they're my PDAs. Disconnected offline PDAs. I bring them home. I sync that data, text files, what have you. Boom, back with my main computer. That's how I'm going to treat portable computing. I'm not going to bring a Wi-Fi connected or cell connected tablet anywhere. None of that, right? Again, this may seem very arbitrary, but I feel like it's going to get me close to that 1989 ideal. So like this, for example, again, the Atari on the desk, or the Amiga on the desk, the Atari Portfolio on the go. If you had these two, this would be a really weird two to have paired up, by the way, as one's running DOS and one's running the Amiga Workbench. But you get my point. These two could be any of the various machines I've talked about, or many, many others. Machine at home, at my station, a little tiny device, a PDA, a portable computer on the go for when I'm out. That is disconnected. I come home, I sync it, boom. That is my computing experience. Except instead of that, now I'm connecting it to I have the System 76 Wild Dog Pro. It's the nice machine I do this on, which is significantly faster than an Amiga 1200, and say the Nokia N810, which again, also significantly faster than the Atari Portfolio. Actually, thinking about it, the N810 has DOSBox on it. Technically, I can run DOS on here faster and with more memory than on that Atari Portfolio. So I'm kind of rocking on that front, even if I want to do my portable computing in DOS. And I'm going to track everything. As I go through this, I'm going to track my word and page count as I'm writing. I've been writing a lot lately. More on that later, but I've been writing a lot. And when I write, I tend to keep track of my word count per day. And it goes all over the map because some days I don't write as much as others. Some days I just sit down and just binge write for quite a few hours. And so I know over time, I've got a spreadsheet for it in LibreOffice, what my output is, how much I write in a given month or quarter. And so over the next 30 days, I'm going to keep tracking that. And I'm just going to watch if it changes at all statistically over time. I'm also going to watch, and this is, I think, kind of interesting, the view count and the video count that I produce. So how many videos I put out in that 30-day window, because I can look back and see how does that compare to previous times, and the view count of those videos. How many people watch those videos? Because I'm not being super active on social media, right? So does that have an impact on the video view count? Are the videos better with me more offline, or are they worse? Did I do a better job promoting or not them when I'm not sitting down online all the time, not able to just constantly interact with people in order to do that? I'm also going to keep track of the hours I've been sleeping. Now, I've not done this quite recently, but a couple months back, I was keeping track of my hours I was sleeping because I was having a little insomnia a few nights and whatnot. And I was like, how much am I really sleeping? So for a couple of weeks, I kind of kept track of my sleep. And so I have a rough baseline of what I have been at. I sleep a little better since then, but I have a rough baseline there. I'm going to keep track of how much sleep I get over the next 30 days. So every day I'll note how much sleep I got the night before. I'm also going to take note of how often I feel under the weather. This is really not enough time to make any sort of real judgment call on if there's any relation here whatsoever. This is astoundingly unscientific. There's so little data that's going to be collected here. But since I have gotten the flu or colds quite a lot over the last 6 months, what's going to happen if I change things up a little bit? Am I going to sleep more? Am I going to feel a little healthier? If I'm disconnected from social media for the most part, will that have an impact on it? I'm not really sure. I'm going to find out. I'm also going to subjectively record on a daily basis how I feel. Am I Happy? How would I rate the day? Did I feel productive? Do I feel satisfied? Etc. It's very subjective. Could be easily influenced by a million different factors, including a total placebo effect. It's very, very subjective and non-scientific, but I'm going to track it anyway. I'm also going to track followers and subscribers. How do they change? If I'm not active on social media, what happens to my follower growth? If I'm not active on social media, how do my YouTube subscribers and RSS audio podcast feed subscribers, how does that change over the 30 days? I'd kind of like to know. What I'm wondering is, if I am not active on social media, will I grow even more? Will I grow less? Will I be growing at the same rate I've been growing at anyway? I gain, 1,200 plus new YouTube subscribers every month, just kind of typically, some months higher. But will that stay roughly the same? Will it grow? I don't know. I would like to find out what that does. So I'm going to track all of it, and I'll talk to you about it as I go. And if there are interesting things to say along the way, if I feel like I have some revelations, or I just simply want to complain about the process or whatever, I'll record and post another video so you can follow along with how I'm doing all of this. Again, it's not that extreme. It really isn't. It's not out there. It's not cuckoo. I'm still using modern equipment. I'm just simply imposing some extraordinarily arbitrary and artificial limitations on the way I use my modern hardware and software to make it replicate a kind of workflow and structure similar to that of what I would have experienced in the 1980s. Simple, right? So that's what we're going to do. Now, this does present a few little unique challenges. If you typically get a hold of me on various social media outlets, you won't be able to. You'll be able to message me. I will not see it, at least not for 30 days. So email me. Brian@lunduke.com works just fine. I'm going to allow myself still to hang out with the people over at Patreon. I'm going to treat that as if it were a isolated message forum on an old system. It's something I have to sit down at my desk, log into it, and specifically check messages. So in that regard, it's not unlike a BBS of old. So for my Patreon subscribers, if you want to get a hold of me, you can leave me a message at patreon.com/BrianLunduke, and telnet to my BBS at bbs.lunduke.com. Those are the three primary ways of getting a hold of me over the next 30 days. That's pretty straightforward. That's it. And that's all. Now, the problem with this is I do a show called Linux Thursday, where every Thursday I let people ask questions related to Linux and free software and post them to various social media outlets. And then me and my co-host respond to those questions here on the show. Let's not, for the next 30 days at least, we're not going to post this to Twitter. I mean, you can. I just won't see it. So email them to me and use the subject line #Linux Thursday, #Linux Thursday, all one word. And if you put that all one word, that exact subject line in, I have a little filter. So when I sit down at my desk to download all of my email, which is really how I'm checking my email starting just a couple hours ago, download all my email, check it using Thunderbird. It goes into a folder for Linux Thursdays, and that's when when we do this show, I'll just pull them and read the emails out, which means you'll now be able to, for the first time in human history, send me questions for Linux Thursday that are very, very long and larger than a tweet length. Please don't make them too long, but you can feel free to write a little bit more than we wrote usually on Twitter. Try to keep it short, though, so that way we can answer more questions during the show. That's it. That's what we're going to do. So that's, if you normally communicate with me on Twitter, on Reddit, on Mastodon, though actually Mastodon, the instance I was on, literally nuked itself like a day or two ago. It's highly frustrating. So I guess you weren't going to interact with me on Mastodon anyway. But any other social media network, or send comments to me on YouTube, sorry, I'm not going to be checking any of that. I'll be watching my YouTube view numbers and subscriber numbers, but I will not be reading the messages or replying to them. I will not be doing any of that. So email, the BBS, or Patreon. those are the ways to get a hold of me. We'll see how this goes. This may prove to be absolutely nothing. This may just be a mild irritation, or this may be totally, totally awesome, and I may think it's the greatest thing ever. Honestly, I have no idea, but it's going to settle a little internal debate I've been having, so that's worth doing all by itself. And this video was made possible by the good people at Lulzbot, who make 3D printers that are friggin' glorious. This is the Lulzbot Mini. You can get lots of really, really cool things for the Lulzbot Mini. Different print heads. They have a little LCD display panel, a little smart panel you can put on your Lulzbot Mini. Otherwise, you can just connect to it via USB cable to your laptop or your desktop or what have you. They've got great free software for printing. The thing is just darn reliable. I absolutely love it. If you're looking for a good 3D printer and you love free software and open source and all that good stuff, you can't go wrong with a Lulzbot. Also from System 76, who helped make this show possible. Love you guys. They make some fantastic laptops. They make great desktops too, which are, one of them is actually sitting down here underneath my desk, powering this show. They ship everything they do with Linux. Oh my God, I'm verklempt. There we go. I drank some liquid. Now I'm better. They ship everything they do with Linux. You can find out over at system76.com. Also, if you want to support the show, there's many ways to do that, but one way is just to simply buy t-shirts that I produce. If you go to lunduke.com, there's a little link to the Lunduke store. If you click on the link to the Lunduke store, there's a sampling of some of the things I sell, some books, some t-shirts, etc. There's also a little link to the complete clothing line catalog, and if you click on that, there's just a ton of weird shirts I put up there, and it's all because I wanted these particular shirts. It's usually dark colored shirts, gray, black, heathered gray, sometimes dark blues and whatnot, with quotes on them, and I use all of these quotes. I use old school IBM VGA styled fonts, so they look like they were written on an old IBM 386 PC clone, right? Like this quote from Linus from 1991. I'm doing a free operating system, just a hobby, won't be big and professional like GNU for 386, 486 AT clones. That was the announcement for Linux, and I just think that's such a wow understatement that I wanted to have it on a t-shirt. Or my other favorite quote from Linus. You not only have to be a good coder to create a system like Linux, you have to be a sneaky bastard too. If you want to have a quote about being a sneaky bastard on your chest, or you want to pick up a Lunduke Show shirt or a bash prompt kill all humans shirt, etc., all you got to do is go over to lunduke.com in the store and click away. Everything you buy goes to support the show, to keep the lights on here, and to keep me doing absolutely ridiculous and stupid things. These are some of the Patreon supporters. They're delightful, delightful human beings. And if you want to support the show directly, you can do so over at patreon.com/Brian Lunduke. Thank you, everybody. And wish me luck.